Metal Gear, the tactical espionage action franchise by legendary game designer Hideo Kojima, remains in the hearts of many as one of the greatest video game series of all time, with some of the greatest games of all time comprising its main entries. But it is also a game series I've never played before. And hey, I've been meaning to for years. I've had friend after friend harp at me to finally take out my copy of the Legacy Collection on PS3 and just go to town and experience what will quite possibly be the greatest sequence of releases that one may ever play, especially with everyone's favorite Snake Eater having its remake Delta just having launched recently. Therefore, I thought it apt an opportunity to dive into Metal Gear as a whole, to see if the hype is deserved in a full retrospective series of reviews spanning the entire franchise. So today, we're going to start by going back to the very beginning to the games that started it all. Not 1998 with Metal Gear Solid, but before that to the 2D games, starting in 1987 before Metal Gear went solid, and look at the 8-bit games that gave this masterful series its foundation, starting with Hideo Kojima's directorial debut, Metal Gear for the MSX2. Believe it or not, but Kojima actually didn't start out working on the game. He was instead placed in charge of the project by a senior associate at Konami, despite being a practical new hire at the time. He was brought in to make an action shoot-'em-up game, but the MSX2's limitations when it came to scrolling and how many sprites it could handle being on screen at once made that impossible. To get around that, Kojima came up with the idea to overhaul the project into a stealth-oriented game, where the player has to prioritize not getting caught instead of shooting every enemy they see. Titled Intruder during development, Metal Gear was released for MSX2 home computers in Japan and Europe in 1987, and would not see a release stateside until its re-release in Metal Gear Solid 3 Subsistence on the PS2. The game was also later made available in the Metal Gear HD Collection and Master Collection, along with most of the other games we'll be talking about today. The game stars a newly recruited rookie codenamed Solid Snake, a new member of Foxhound sent out to invade the military state named Outer Heaven near South Africa in Operation Intrude N313. Led by his commander Big Boss, Snake travels from building to building in an attempt to find the creator of Metal Gear, a giant bipedal mech that can launch nuclear missiles from any point in the world, in order to destroy it and save the world from nuclear annihilation all by himself. He's not without help though. On his journey, Snake can contact fellow operatives via a transceiver. Kyle Schneider, who provides Snake with details on his weapons and items, Diane, who provides help with boss weaknesses and traps, Jennifer, who provides Snake with essential equipment but only if he's saved enough POWs to reach rank 4, and of course Big Boss, who helps by guiding Snake to essential items to avoid poison gas, infrared lasers, etc., until he begins to purposely put him in the way of traps and ambushes. Suspicious. You make your way through building after building, base after base, sometimes backtracking to find missed key items like gas mask, infrared goggles, oxygen tanks, body armor, etc., with your many keycards that you have to cycle through every time you want to go through a locked door. Honestly, the amount of cryptic things in this game when it comes to having to explore through so many monotonous dungeon-like areas and cycling through your many keycards to find the right one to open the right door, opening and closing the menu over and over and over again can date this game by a lot. Hence why a lot of people refer to the original Metal Gear as a guide game, much akin to how people view the original Legend of Zelda and Metroid nowadays. You just know that players back in the day were mapping out every building, door key, and trapdoor throughout Outer Heaven, or just consulting good old guidebooks, but now we have online guides at our fingertips. Yippee! The checkpoint system here is actually pretty good, so I never found the game too difficult during the actual moment-to-moment gameplay. I also think the modern control scheme of having one button for punching, one for shooting, the select button for your radio, and the triggers for your weapon and equipment screens respectively is a really great setup that feels really intuitive. I wish the transceiver screen wasn't as archaic, but it was 1987 after all, so I can't fault the game too much. The thing I think that has aged the worst, besides the lack of a map system, is the controls. The MSX2 couldn't handle very great controls, and you can feel that here. At first I thought it was just my DualShock 3 being weird, but the controls are just very stiff and rigid, and I can feel a lot of players will find that a tough pill to swallow. Because of it, punching and evading enemies can feel tougher than it probably should. Ultimately, I think it's fine as it doesn't dampen the gameplay experience that much, but it's still something I noticed throughout my playthrough. I do also think it's pretty stupid that you have to unequip the gas mask to use the keycard on the door, guaranteeing you take damage on your way out of the room and when you enter back in. Okay, back to the plot. Metal Gear was created by one Dr. Drago Petrovich Madnar, who is now being held captive in Outer Heaven. You eventually come across him after saving fellow Foxhound operative Grey Fox. Madnar refuses to divulge information on how to destroy Metal Gear unless you save his daughter Ellen, who is also captive. You make your whole ass way across the base to save her, make your whole ass way back, with Petrovich finally telling you the sequence in which you need to plant C4 on Metal Gear's legs to defeat it. Except bro doesn't tell you the last leg, that shit is for you to figure out! You eventually make your way to the final building and are forced to walk over electrical flooring that you can't turn off to the final room. Don't have enough rations? Yeah, get fucked. You enter the room, destroy Metal Gear's machine gun cameras shoot at you, and as Outer Heaven self-destructs around you, you attempt to escape but are stopped by Big Boss, who is just revealed to be Outer Heaven's leader the whole time over radio, double-crossing Foxhound. You face off against the Madman, who used Snake to give the UN false information on Metal Gear but underestimated his abilities by blowing him to high heaven with a rocket launcher, ultimately escaping outer heaven as it blows up behind Snake. And that's all there really is to the original Metal Gear. It was definitely super innovative at the time, but it's been 38 years since then, and it has certainly aged a lot, but it can still prove to be fun if you have patience for its crypticism and monotony. It's with Kojima's follow-up where Metal Gear started to become the truly story-focused series that it's known as today, but the small beginnings here are something to cherish. The innovative stealth and many weapons that Snake can utilize like C4, mines, remote-controlled missiles, submachine gun, etc. still make this game pretty fun, but nothing substantial. Just a look back into an older time, especially when looking at how far the series has come today. Now, despite the original not releasing in the West until 2005, Metal Gear still remained a retro classic between 1987 and saw its release in 1998. How? Why, what else but the NES port, of course. It was released for the Famicom just a few months after the MSX2, and saw localization in the West in '88. This is the version of the game that most people experienced, and when Solid released in '98, this is what gamers thought it was a revival of. This lesser imperfect, fucked up twin of the MSX2 game got all of the recessive genes, being based on its source code and developed by a separate team of Konami with no help from Kojima's original team, and according to programmer Masahiro Ueno, the team was told to make the game as different as possible. This is made pretty evident by the opening scene of the game, which has Snake and 3 unknown soldiers who are never seen or mentioned again, parachuting onto the island instead of arriving by water. This is then followed by a shockingly lengthy section in the jungle featuring guard dogs, trucks, dense looping forest, etc., all of which were not in the original. Once you get inside the actual building, the game proceeds as normal, but with changes here and there to accommodate the limitations of the mapper they used to develop the game. Due to these limitations, the team had to make the basements of several buildings into individual buildings of their own, accessed via jungle mazes in between enemy bases. The Hind D and Metal Gear bosses have also been completely replaced by an enemy named Twinshot and a supercomputer that just controls Metal Gear. So therefore, not only is the final boss nowhere near as hard because there's no set pattern to defeating it, you just defeat a couple of guys and then keep planting C4 until it explodes, you are instead required to save Dr. Madnar, but it's just significantly easier. It doesn't really fight back at all. So yeah, the Metal Gear, the namesake of the game, that was on the box in North America along with that Kyle Reese illustration, is nowhere to be seen throughout the entire game. Navigating the menu is also pretty irritating, because of course the NES had a lack of triggers, so unlike the PS2 port, they had to map the weapon screen, equipment screen, and transceiver all to the select button. You can close out of this little bar by pressing B, but once you're in a menu, B does nothing and now it's select to cancel. This can be pretty annoying at first, but I did find myself able to get used to this setup just about as quickly as I did to pressing the left and right triggers while playing the original on PS3. The real issue with the game, and one that clearly made this way worse than the original right out of the gate upon release, is that if you die and press continue, you are sent back to the very first screen of the game. No matter how far in you are, you will always wind up right back at the very beginning if you so happen to die. Do you lose all progress? Thankfully, no. You retain all of your items and weapons you had found up until that point, and if you press end instead of continue, you're given a password to save your progress. But if you type in that long as fuck password upon rebooting the game, you're placed at the last checkpoint? So yeah, back in the 80s and 90s, or fuck, even on the Japan-only GameCube re-release of this, if you wanted to continue where you left off, you'd have to type in this whole long-ass password all over again. It's times like this where I am so glad to live in a time where I can just make a save state and load it whenever, because the ability to do that affected my playthrough so positively, to the point where honestly, I think I like this almost as much as the original. Now yes, of course the original is better. It doesn't have a garbage translation that wasn't proofread by a single person, the 80s standard, it has better menus, better sprites, and a better narrative simply due to the NES port's lack of screen room for text compared to the original. But this port in my eyes has slightly better controls and handling of the weapons. I think Snake's sprite here is a lot more iconic and clean, and stealth works a lot better because enemies don't chase you between rooms, balancing out some of the punishing nature from having you restart at the beginning. This was also used to make the Commodore 64 and MS-DOS ports, but you won't ever hear anyone talk about those, including me. Basically, I would never blame someone for liking the NES version more than the MSX2 original, and I don't think it's the bastardization that Kojima later called it out as, but yes, it objectively is a sloppily put together port of a game that pushed boundaries back in '87, and in my eyes, that's okay. Now, what isn't as okay is the abomination, as most people call it, that followed the NES port's great success in North America and Europe. You see, Konami saw big-ass dollar signs when Metal Gear sold buckets and buckets of cash in the West, so they, once again without Kojima's involvement, greenlit development on a sequel to Metal Gear on NES that would only see release outside of Japan, that game being Snake's Revenge, released in 1990. Now I'm gonna be honest, this game is pretty wacky when you look at it from a story perspective. Snake has been Jean-Claude Van Damme-ified all the way up and is commanding a new team of Sylvester Stallone and Carl Weathers to invade the enemy base of returning villain Colonel Vermin Katafi and his leader Hayarola Kakamimi. Wait a fucking minute, who the fuck is Vermin Katafi? Well, according to the back of the first game's box, he was the main villain. No, he wasn't, that was Big Boss! You don't even know the name of the villain going into the first game. They just made up that shit and kept up with it for the sequel? Alright, the real in-game plot is that terrorists in the Middle East have started to build Metal Gear 2 and threaten to use it, so it's up to Snake and newcomers John, Nick, and actual returning character Jennifer to invade the island and defeat not only the revived Big Boss, but also on actual Metal Gear this time. Hell yeah! For as much flack as this game gets, I'm actually inclined to agree with Kojima's stance on this game, that despite being a slightly crappy game, this still maintains the spirit of the first Metal Gear and is shockingly decent. The game basically plays the same as its NES predecessor, but of course the sprites are fairly different and honestly nowhere near as good as the NES ones that tried to replicate the MSX originals very successfully. Here, Snake is smeared with ketchup and mustard and explores mostly poop brown or puke green buildings, but despite the lackluster sprite work, still controls pretty damn well. Enemies can now follow you between rooms this time, and the opening jungle section can make this fact atrocious due to the blackout and searchlights. This and the fact that Snake now seemingly takes less hits to die can make the opening areas of this game much more difficult than it really needs to be. And honestly, if I didn't have save states to back me up, my controller would be pulverized into dust. This is at its worst with the bosses, with all of them having what is quite possibly the worst enemy design I have ever had the misfortune of having to complete. Take the first boss for instance, which is just a bunch of robotic cyborg linebackers who charge directly at whatever position you're in, whether you're moving or not. If you enter this with no rations like I did for the first time, good fucking luck, because you need frame perfect accuracy in order to dodge their attacks. So after an hour of trial and error, loading save state after save state, I went back, punched the shit out of a bunch of enemies until I filled up on rations, went back, healed when I needed to, and of course when I finally killed the first of 5 linebackers, the fight became manageable. How fucked is that? Only once you expend an unnecessary amount of bullets and health items can you finally dodge the boss's attack properly? While no other bosses in the game contain this much horseshit, they definitely came close. You've got one that just has a pitfall in the middle of the arena, and a tank boss that can instant kill you if you're unlucky enough to be firing a missile at it right as it enters your path. The final fight against Big Boss isn't awful. You just shoot him with a bunch of rocket launchers like in the first game for his first phase, and then lay a bunch of landmines at his feet during his second RoboCop phase. The plot, as you may have guessed, isn't a whole lot. You just go around, John gets purposely captured so you can get into the base, they think he's a spy but he's actually been replaced with a decoy and is never heard from again. Someone tells you that Jennifer's a spy but she actually isn't. Nick fucking dies on screen, which is crazy, and that's really about it. Much more bare bones compared to the first, but with much less grammatical errors. Snake's Revenge also decides to change things up by adding side-scrolling sections in between most of the game's main areas. These suck. They don't control great at all, and trying to be stealthy to get past most of the soldiers in these is nigh impossible because it really just relies on pure luck that they don't turn around and find you the second you pop up to shoot at them. And if you do get caught, unlike during regular gameplay, there is actively nowhere you can go to dodge the incoming bullets, so if you get caught, you're expending a shit ton of bullets and losing a boatload of health. Lastly, the number of oxygen tanks in C4 you need to sneak through each underwater section is ridiculous. If you don't max out on each your first time going in, you've got to go all the way back to try and find them. All of that criticism out of the way, let's move on to some positives. Both the MSX and NES versions of Metal Gear have pretty lackluster soundtracks. Nothing awful or anything, but nothing that stands out as memorable, if only for the reason that the same tracks loop over and over again ad nauseum until you can't help but remember them. Thankfully, Snake's Revenge boasts a comparatively much bigger and diverse soundtrack that actually sounds pretty damn good. If you like chiptune 8-bit soundtracks, you should definitely check this one out. Shockingly good. Everything else gameplay-wise that I would praise this game for basically transfers over from the previous game. It feels equally as responsive to move around, punch or shoot enemies, wield different weapons, etc. One thing I will give Snake's Revenge, however, is that it tried to fix the weird menu inputs with the select button by having a secondary bar that brings you to one of the other select menus always at the bottom. Went into the weapons menu but want to go into equipment, now you don't have to go all the way back out to access it. Just press select again, tap over, and select. This simple tweak in addition made navigating the menu much easier and more intuitive. The transceiver menu is still pretty weird though, because it has its own little sub-menus that take a second to pop in and take a tad longer to get out of compared to the other menus, but that's alright. Also, props to this game for actually having character portraits of who's talking to you over the transceiver, something missing from the previous, with only Snake's head being visible in the MSX version. You'd think with all of these improvements that they'd at least try to make the fucking bosses better, but oh well. Like I said earlier, you kill RoboCop Big Boss, you destroy the Metal Gear 2, mission complete. The United Nations declares Snake's victory as World Peace Day, and your reward for beating the game is just a big, ugly-ass sprite of Snake's stupid fucking face. All in all, I think Snake's Revenge is nowhere near as bad as people say it is, provided you ignore how unfair and poorly designed some of those fuck-ass bosses are. If you liked Metal Gear 1 and 2 and have the itch to play another game with the same formula, definitely check out Snake's Revenge. It is on the Master Collection, so if you want more 8-bit Metal Gear, there you go. Now, rumor has it that Kojima was riding on the subway one day and was approached by a fellow colleague at Konami who had worked with him in the past, complaining that he wasn't helming the new sequel to Metal Gear. Yes, this was how Kojima found out about Snake's Revenge. Not by Konami, but by word of mouth. Pretty pissed at this, Kojima worked up a treatment for a full sequel to Metal Gear that would be directed by him, once again for the MSX2. That sequel would end up being Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake, releasing only in Japan in 1990, just a few months after Snake's Revenge. This game would change things up drastically by significantly improving gameplay, adding in many new gameplay functions to assist with immersing the player in stealth and combat, but also by boosting the story's importance. And oh boy does it show, because this is so much better than the first. In this game, you can now crawl. Yeah, holy fucking shit, crawling baby, hell yeah. As basic as this sounds, stealth is no longer just sneaking around corners, as now you not only have to watch out for flooring that can make noise and potentially alert guards to your presence due to said noise, but there are also little ducts where you can crawl into to avoid a guard walking by. You can also crawl under trucks to bypass enemy soldiers, or crawl under tables to collect items. Basically, crawling is the shit in this game. You can even use it to pick up landmines instead of getting your whole ass left foot blown off. Snake's arsenal has been increased, now including anti-tank and anti-aircraft grenades and missiles, remote control mice to sneak ahead either as a diversion or to sniff out traps or obstacles, a camouflage mat to hide under and avoid enemy detection, and even a bucket for some reason which has the same properties as the cardboard box, but I don't know why you'd ever use it because it makes noise upon use. Metal Gear 2 ups the presentation tenfold. Despite still being on the MSX2 and released only 3 years later, this shit looks like it was ripped straight from the Super Nintendo 16-bit era, with beautiful sprite work littering each area Snake traverses through. Even the intro itself, which is just a long opening credit showing blueprints of the new Metal Gear D's mechanisms, looks breathtaking. Now, when the game originally came out in 1990, it had these really weird, realistic portraits of each character during cutscenes that just look like shit today, all clearly based on actors at the time, with Big Boss just straight up being Sean Connery. Starting with its re-release in Metal Gear Solid 3 Subsistence, the character portraits were updated to fall much more in line with Yoji Shinkawa's art style introduced in the Solid series. Honestly, I think this change does wonders when it comes to this game holding up, because the updated character portraits look fucking phenomenal. You can really see each character's emotions through these, that paired with a pretty damn good music and very well written dialogue to boot. I did not get expected to get this pulled into the series narrative this early on in this marathon, but boy is it great. So I guess it's time I talk about the story. The Cold Wars came and went, countries are seemingly choosing peace and deciding to get rid of their nuclear warheads, but oil reserves are seemingly running thin. Thankfully, one Dr. Keo Marv develops Oilix, a synthesized alternative to oil that he's about to introduce to the world, only to be kidnapped by agents of Zanzibar Land. Commander Roy Campbell brings Snake out of retirement from Foxhound in order to rescue Dr. Marv. There to help is CIA operative Holly White, who's been posing as an American journalist to gather info on Zanzibar's operations. As Snake makes his way through Zanzibar Land's many bases and dense jungle, he comes across an assassin known as the Black Ninja and defeats him in combat. As he dies, Snake discovers that the ninja was actually Kyle Schneider, the leader of the resistance against Outer Heaven. Confused as to why Kyle would join the enemy's side, Snake presses on and finds Dr. Petrovich Madnar also kidnapped and held up in a warehouse in the jungle. He too is apparently kidnapped alongside Dr. Marv and going to the science convention in the US. Madnar was brought to Zanzibar Land to continue work on building a new Metal Gear under the leadership of Big Boss, who had somehow survived the rocket launcher you shot at his face in the first game and is now using Zanzibar Land to bring in lost soldiers thirsting for combat and orphans of war so that they can be trained to become the next generations of soldiers. While attempting to find Marv, Snake manages to get into contact with him, but is assisted by STB agent Gustava Hefner, his bodyguard. Snake manages to find Gustava despite her being in enemy uniform by following her into a woman's restroom. The two find Madnar and travel through the sewers. While Madnar takes the longest piss in history, Snake and Gustava catch up, Gustava revealing her tragic backstory and her love for a man named Frank Yeager, but her life fell apart when she attempted to defect to America as she was turned away at the border, having no real home from that point on. Madnar returns and the three take an elevator up to the surface. They reach a bridge, Madnar crossing first, then Gustava. But when she crosses, a missile strikes the bridge, sending her back towards Snake with her only being able to get her few last words out before dying. Metal Gear D appears before Snake, piloted by Gray Fox, who is Snake's ally in Outer Heaven. Once again, another ally turned enemy. Snake, determined to take revenge against Gray Fox and Big Boss after the death of Gustava, presses on. He eventually finds out through Holly that Madnar was not kidnapped but volunteered to go to Zanzibar of his own accord to continue making Metal Gear and offered up Marv to them. Knowing that he's been caught, Madnar attempts to attack Snake, Snake sending missile after missile into Madnar until he's finally down. Madnar had accidentally killed Marv trying to get info out of him, but Snake manages to find Marv's backup MSX drive that contained all of his work on Oilix within. Now carrying the path to the world's future with Oilix and the knowledge on how to defeat Metal Gear D from Madnar's dying wish to repent for his daughter, Snake confronts Gray Fox within the Metal Gear and manages to destroy the mech. Snake wakes up, missing all of his stuff, and is contacted by his ally George Kassler, who informs Snake that Gray Fox's real name is Frank Yeager. That's right, Gray Fox fired off the missile that killed Gustava, his fiancée. Just a few rooms over lies the bloody Gray Fox, ready to go hand to hand with Snake in a battle between true warriors, no weapons. Of course, Snake is victorious, Gray Fox revealing to Snake that after the fall of Outer Heaven, the government gave no shits about who was left behind, which is why Gray Fox and Kyle defected to Big Boss's side, as he was the only one who saved them from the carnage and took them in, realizing that they were soldiers that no longer fit into the natural world and civilization. Another few rooms over lies Big Boss, taunting Snake, flaunting his plan to create a world with numerous wars so that all soldiers can constantly live freely on the battlefield. Snake versus Big Boss again. The loser liberated from their curse of being a soldier, and the winner forced to continue to live in the present hell. Snake manages to scrape enough materials together, finding a lighter and an aerosol can to spew flames at Big Boss until he finally goes down, dying for real this time in a fiery blaze. Snake and Holly reunite and call their getaway pilot as soldiers upon soldiers chase after them. Snake and Holly have to mow down man after man until their helicopter finally arrives, taking them home with Marv's Oilix formula safe and sound, and for a while, the world and Snake can rest. There you go. Metal Gear 2's plot is not only a lot more dense, but the actual events happening around Snake are a lot more grandiose in scope than the first game, and the dialogue, character motivations, backstories, and world building here do so much to enhance the player's immersion into this world and really begin to show Kojima's talents as a creative with this series. To mention some quick criticisms I have for this game, I feel like the bosses are a bit too finicky most of the time. The Running Man, where you have to plant C4's rooms ahead of him, the Hind D, where you have extremely limited ammo to experiment with your missiles, and even the Predator in the tall grass were all pretty tricky and in a way that didn't feel too rewarding to overcome. I also think this game does no better when it comes to solving the many cryptic ways to progress, most especially with that damn swamp section. Fuck that shit. Thank God guides are at my fingertips, because this one was equally as much of a guide game as the last, and you still have to go in and out of your inventory to swap between keycards. At least you have an oxygen meter before you start taking damage, so equipping your keycard to leave the room isn't as bad, but still. I will say that a fair amount of ideas behind some of these puzzles are really cool and inventive, like waiting for a soldier to enter the woman's restroom so that you know it's Gustava, hiding in the sauna to melt the pendant into a key, or using cheese-flavored rations to get rats out of a vent you need to crawl into. But on the other hand, there is a lot of tedious backtracking in this game that can just go on and on. And there's a puzzle to find out Dr. Madnar's frequency that used to require deciphering a code in the game's manual, but that shit is so incredibly confusing that you're better off just using a guide. Aside from that, the soundtrack in this game is actually pretty damn good. It has this really unique twang to it that really enhanced a lot of the more emotional atmospheric tracks, a lot of which are still stuck in my head even weeks after finishing the game. Of course, this is still only the beginning, and later games in the series will get much more ambitious, rich, and riveting with its characters, messages, narrative, world building, etc., but this is still a wonderful foundation to begin the series with. We're skipping ahead in the release timeline a little bit with this one, but trust me, it will make sense to include here. After the global success of Metal Gear Solid on PS1, Konami's European division requested that a version of the game be made for the Game Boy Color. Honestly, this was typical as fuck back then, and even more so going into the Game Boy Advance era, to have a super successful console game, especially on PlayStation, for it only to be brought to a Nintendo system via the Game Boy line. I mean, this exact scenario happened with Metal Gear Solid 3 on 3DS. Director Shinta Nojiri, who had previously worked with Kojima on Policenauts and would later go on to help script the stories of Metal Gear Solid 2 through 4, decided not to just demake Metal Gear Solid 1, but instead make a brand new Metal Gear story, taking the gameplay of Kojima's MSX classics and reworking them to a more modern standard. The result was the alternative sequel to the original, ignoring Metal Gear 2 and crafting its own narrative, Metal Gear Ghost Babel, or just Metal Gear Solid in North America. Like I just said, this game ignores Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake, taking place 7 years after Snake's mission in Outer Heaven. Colonel Campbell, who in this timeline is not shown up on screen but knew Snake before his retirement, hunts him down with a group of armed men to recruit him on a mission to Gindra, a South African country, as a group of terrorists have hijacked a plane carrying a new prototype of Metal Gear and are taking it to a military base named Galud, where Outer Heaven was destroyed 7 years prior. Snake is assisted by Mei Ling, a tech graduate first introduced in Metal Gear Solid proper, CIA agent Brian McBride, Merc Weasel, and eventually the lone survivor of the Delta Force that arrived before Snake, Chris Jenner. With their help, Snake battles against Gindra's military and Black Chamber, a group of mercenaries akin to Foxhound, consisting of boomerang user Slasher Hawk, puppeteer Marionette Owl, pyromaniac Pyro Bison, and their leader, Black Arts Viper. This game is mainly divided into 13 stages of varying lengths, supposedly to better accommodate its portable nature. Some stages can be super brief, being only 5 to 15 minutes long, but some of the more traditional labyrinth-like areas can take upwards of an hour to get through, at least in my experience. Just like Metal Gear 1 and 2, you have a handful of small wooded areas, with most of the game taking place within buildings, sewers, a power plant, etc. As said previously, Snake meets sole Delta Force survivor Chris Jenner on his mission, who of course is scarred due to only surviving because of her absence while her fellow operatives were slaughtered in an ambush. The two eventually find the designer of the new Metal Gear Gander, Dr. James Hark, who is actually a snotty 18-year-old nerd named Jimmy. Snake puts Chris in charge of Jimmy's protection, but they're both found, the two getting captured at one point or another. Snake manages to take out members of Black Chamber on his way to stop Metal Gear, but they manage to launch a nuke with it regardless. It lands in the middle of a testing site in the US, turning out to be a dud. A warning shot from Gindra's leader, General. Snake manages to destroy the power plant supplying Metal Gear its power, but only after escaping the falling building does he find Jimmy outside, who is saved thanks to the sacrifice of another Delta Force survivor that Chris didn't know about. Angry at himself for creating something with such destructive power, something that can only fuel hatred into the world, Jimmy resolves to create something for the benefit of mankind. It isn't even seconds later when Jimmy's handcuffs explode, killing him. Snake resolves to destroy Metal Gear and save Chris, and is attacked by an upgraded Hind D by General Second in Command, Sophie Indrum, who Snake initially mistakes for Chris, as there have been talks amongst Snake's comrades as to who could possibly be a traitor and a secret fifth member of Black Chamber. Snake manages to take down the Hind D, but chooses to spare Sophie as he can see in her eyes that she does not wish to fight for this cause anymore. Snake manages to make his way through the maintenance facility, defeats Black Arts Viper in combat, and manages to save Chris. It is here revealed that the same person who ordered the slaughter of Black Chamber 2 years ago also ordered Chris to delete all data on Outer Heaven and Metal Gear, aka Project Babel. Project Babel being the launch of Outer Heaven and later the project to expand Gindra's military and independence to further progress Metal Gear's development and further US interests. Snake forgives Chris and chooses to continue putting his faith in her, sending her off to find an escape route. At the 100th basement floor, just a few rooms away where Dr. Petrovich Madnar's original Metal Gear still lies rotting, Snake finds Metal Gear Gander being piloted by General and does battle with it. After a pretty damn tough boss battle, Snake manages to destroy it and get all the information out of General that he needs, including that he was secretly working with the CIA's Deputy Director of Intelligence, who was also the one who began and funded Outer Heaven, which was indeed a US operation the entire time, with Snake's title as Legend serving as a cover story to save the US's ass. General gives all of this information to Snake on a floppy disk, but Viper arrives for one last battle, threatening to fire off 7 nukes within 90 seconds if Snake doesn't manage to kill him. This whole time, Viper has been seeking revenge against Anonymous and Foxhound, Anonymous being the US official who ordered Black Chamber's deaths. Black Chamber itself was created as a backup group after how popular, well-known, and followed Foxhound became after Snake's success in Outer Heaven. You of course defeat Viper and save the day. Snake and Chris drive off in a jeep, leaving Sophie to rebuild and lead Gindra into a better tomorrow, whereas Snake resolves to confront the faceless men of the US government who play with people's lives like pawns and won't rest until then so that he can finally live. And that's the plot of Ghost Babel. While not as emotionally riveting as Metal Gear 2's storyline with its characters, I'm still pretty impressed with how fleshed out Snake and Chris became over the course of the story, and even Mei Ling for that matter. When I heard Chris's backstory over Codec for the first time, I was genuinely shocked that this game was bold enough to be this ambitious with its original characters, and honestly, that's one great way to describe this game. Ambitious. Ghost Babel's original story, freed from the constraints of being tied to Metal Gear 2 or Solid, gives itself a lot of wiggle room to be creative, original, and different from what came before, and although I haven't played anything in the series past this yet, I'm sure this will still stand out amongst the rest of the series. Basically, it's no wonder why Kojima decided to bring on Nojiri to work on further mainline entries, because his work here is pretty damn good. The original characters here also just look great. Snake of course looks like his typical self, but the look of these characters matches and contrasts with him in a way that's just so cool, with the character designer for this game, Ikyu Nakamura, going on to work with Kojima again on the Boktai series. Even the design for Metal Gear Gander itself looks like a design ripped straight from a modern mech anime, and you will not see my ass complaining about that, as it looks sleek as hell. And every time the game decides to pull out some full screen sprites for a cutscene, it looks absolutely stunning. Moving on to the gameplay, Ghost Babel basically adapts Metal Gear 2's formula, with your items and radar being shown on the right side of the screen, the radar being used in the same way to assist with stealth, find mines, see incoming missiles, etc. The improvements really only come in with the controls. Snake can now run in 8 directions instead of 4, and the fluidity of his movement compared to the MSX games feels like a breath of fresh air. Crawling operates the same, and punching and shooting enemies feels even more responsive, especially with punching, as your punch's hitbox is much bigger than any of the previous games mentioned in this video, so it doesn't feel as cheap when you go for a punch but are just pixels away from your target. Although the knockback Snake receives from enemy punches and how brief his invincibility frames are, it makes it pretty tough to get away from a gang of soldiers running after you. But hey, at least they punch you and deal less damage instead of just blowing you to bits with their machine guns. Snake's smoother movement also allowed the sections where you had to fire off remote-controlled Nikita missiles to be much easier, with some parts requiring you to navigate the missiles diagonally to get to the electrical panel you have to destroy. The bosses in this game are also just the best of any game discussed in this video. Once again, this is clearly thanks to the much smoother gameplay, so throwing grenades, shooting missiles, or just regular shots at the moving targets felt much more responsive, allowing the bosses in this game to be a lot of fun. Now moving on to criticisms, just like the rest of the games in this video, without a guide you can get pretty lost in these stages, and nowhere is this worse than in the power plant with how many vents you have to slowly crawl through at a fucking snail's pace, or the shipping center where you have to swap what color box you're hiding in to be sent down the proper chute. If I didn't have a guide for that section, I would certainly spend hours and hours taking my sweet ass time in those conveyor belts trying to find the right one, and if you don't, you literally have to backtrack all the way back up through the building to try again. The second power plant stage also just reuses the exact layout from the last level but with no differences. You just have to find 4 very specific looking walls to plant C4 on to blow up the building, but those spots are in different locations in every unique playthrough, so a guide is useless here. So it's up to you to monotonously travel through the entire building trying to find those 4 damn spots, and my ass had 3 of them hidden behind those long ass vent sections. There's this computer section not far into the game where you're just told to keep pressing 4 buttons in a random order over and over and over again until you either A, magically find the right pattern after blowing your brains out trying to find it, or B, the much easier option, call Colonel 3 times until he just fucking tells you? So fucking stupid. If it wasn't for these moments of getting extremely lost, this game would have been much better in my eyes, and the slightly lesser story knocks it down a few more points for Metal Gear 2, because what's the point of fluid gameplay with shockingly fluid sprite work if your level design is confusing and boring for multiple hours of playtime? Basically, Metal Gear Ghost Babel is a good game to pop in and try if you finished Metal Gear 1 and 2, found yourself wanting more, but still want a better experience than Snake's Revenge. This game checks off a lot of boxes that Kojima's original 2 did, while also implementing ideas from Metal Gear Solid like the stun and chaff grenades and additional VR missions to serve as extra replayability, to act as a cherry on top of a pretty damn solid Metal Gear story. Pun not intended. It's a shame that this never got re-released in any of the collections that have released over the years, definitely due to its non-canon and obscure status in the series, and now fetches upwards of $200 on the secondhand market. But if you're a fan of Metal Gear, Ghost Babel deserves a shot, and it definitely gets my recommendation. And so those are all the games that came out before Metal Gear went solid. Metal Gear 1 and 2 serve as pretty good classics to start out the series' foundation in both a gameplay and world building sense, with each game in the series after this building off of the world and characters that this duology established. The NES games also serve as classic retro titles, but aren't reflected on nearly as fondly, and it's pretty clear why. And Ghost Babel is the underappreciated spin-off that serves as the final 2D Metal Gear game before the series fully delved into 3D after Solid. And that's what we'll be looking at next time, the first entry in the Metal Gear Solid series. Will the saga of Solid Snake continue to wow, or has it aged more or less than people make it out to be? Until then, thanks for watching.